The air in the Providence Municipal Court isn't like the air in other government buildings. In other places, the air is stale, recycled, filled with the boredom of bureaucracy. But here, the air is electric. It vibrates, it holds its breath, because in this room you aren't just facing a fine, you aren't just facing a ticket. You are facing Frank Caprio. And Frank Caprio doesn't just look at your driving record, he looks at your soul. Most people know this. They walk in with their hats in their hands. They tuck in their shirts. They rehearse their apologies in the hallway, whispering, "Your Honor," to the peeling paint on the walls. They know that in this courtroom, respect is the currency. If you have it, you might just walk out with a second chance. If you don't, well, God help you. But then there are those who don't know. Or worse, those who don't care. It was a Tuesday. The docket was full, a sea of faces ranging from terrified teenagers to exhausted single mothers. The hum of the courtroom was a low murmur, the sound of anxiety. Judge Caprio sat on the bench, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, sifting through files with the rhythm of a man who has heard every excuse in the book, yet still hopes to hear the truth. "Next case," called Inspector Quinn, his voice booming through the microphone. The name read out was long, sophisticated. It carried the weight of old money and foreign influence. Let's call him Alex. Alex didn't walk to the podium. He sauntered. He was 22, dressed in a suit that cost more than the bailiff's annual salary. His hair was perfectly gelled, his chin held high. Not with dignity, but with disdain. He looked at the courtroom not as a place of law, but as a minor inconvenience. A fly to be swatted away. He reached the podium and leaned against it, crossing his ankles. He didn't look up at the judge. He looked at his watch. Inspector Quinn, a man who had seen everything from hardened criminals to weeping grandmothers, stiffened. He sensed the shift in the atmosphere immediately. The courtroom is a theater, and everyone has a role. The accused is supposed to be humble. The judge is supposed to be authoritative. But Alex was rewriting the script. "State your name for the record," Quinn said, his tone sharpening. "You have it on the paper," Alex replied. He didn't speak into the microphone. He spoke to the air, bored. A ripple of silence went through the gallery. You could hear a pin drop. In the back, a woman clutching a speeding ticket gasped softly, "You just don't talk to Inspector Quinn like that. And you certainly don't act like that in front of the man sitting on the high bench." Judge Caprio stopped writing. He didn't slam a gavel. He didn't shout. He simply stopped moving. The pen hovered over the paper. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head. His eyes, usually warm with a grandfatherly kindness, were now unreadable. They locked onto the young man leaning against the podium. "Young man," Caprio said. His voice was soft, but it carried to the back of the room without effort. "In this courtroom, we stand when we address the court." It was a simple instruction, a chance, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man who didn't know he was underwater. Alex smirked. It was a small thing, a twitch of the corner of his mouth, but on the courtroom monitors, it looked like a billboard screaming arrogance. "I'm comfortable," Alex said. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It pressed down on the lungs of everyone in the room. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore, this was a challenge. This was the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. Judge Caprio took off his glasses. He set them down on the bench. He folded his hands. "I beg your pardon?" the judge asked. He wasn't asking for clarification. He was giving the boy one last chance to save himself. Alex sighed, a theatrical exhalation of impatience. He looked up at the judge, his eyes cold. "I said, I am comfortable standing like this, and besides, I don't think you understand who my father is." There it was. The card, the ace in the hole, the shield. In Alex's world, that sentence was a magic spell. It opened doors. It made tickets disappear. It made bartenders apologize and bouncers step aside. He had used it 1,000 times and it had never failed. He was the son of a diplomat. He had immunity. He had status. He had the invincible armor of privilege. He expected the judge to flinch. He expected the inspector to check the paperwork nervously. He expected the room to bow. But Frank Caprio isn't a bouncer, and the Providence Municipal Court isn't a nightclub. "I don't care who your father is," Caprio said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I care about who you are. And right now, who you are is a young man standing in a court of law, showing disrespect not just to me, but to the people of this city, to the flag behind me, to the process." "My father represents his country," Alex shot back, his voice rising. The veneer of boredom was cracking, replaced by petulance. "I have diplomatic protection. You can't touch me." The gallery watched, wide-eyed. This was a car crash in slow motion. "Diplomatic immunity," Caprio said, leaning forward, "applies to the function of the state. It is not a license to be rude. It is not a free pass to treat my officers with contempt. And it certainly does not apply to parking in a fire lane and then refusing to stand up straight when you are called to answer for it." "I'm leaving," Alex said. He actually turned around. He started to walk away. "Inspector?" Caprio's voice cracked like a whip. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. "Lock the doors," Caprio ordered. The sound of the heavy wooden doors thudding shut echoed like a gunshot. Click. Alex stopped. He turned back, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not arrogance, not boredom, fear. "You can't do that," Alex stammered. This is illegal. I'll call the embassy." "You can call whoever you like," Caprio said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "But until we resolve the issue of your contempt for this court, you aren't going anywhere. You seem to be under the impression that respect is something you buy or something you inherit. Today, you are going to learn that respect is something you earn." The judge looked at the bailiff. "Have him take a seat, on the bench, not in the gallery, right there, in the front row. Make him sit there and watch." "Watch what?" Alex demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "Watch," Caprio said, putting his glasses back on. "How real people behave." Alex was guided, firmly, to the front bench. He sat down, arms crossed, fuming. He was red in the face, humiliated, furiously typing on his phone, likely texting his father, his lawyers, anyone who could rescue him from this indignity. He wasn't listening. He was plotting. But he couldn't block out the room. "Next case," Caprio called. The next 10 minutes were a masterclass in humanity, and whether he wanted to or not, Alex was the student. The first case was a woman named Maria. She walked up to the podium slowly. She looked tired. Her hands were rough, the hands of someone who scrubbed floors or worked in a factory. She had 3 tickets: expired registration, parking, broken tail light. "Good morning, Maria," Caprio said. His voice was completely different now. The steel was gone, replaced by velvet. "You look worried." "I am, Your Honor," Maria whispered. I work 2 jobs. My husband, he left last month. I have 3 kids. I had to choose between the registration and the groceries." She started to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just silent tears running down a face that had seen too much hardship. In the front row, Alex looked up from his phone. He saw the woman's shoes. They were worn out. He saw her coat. It was thin. "How much are the fines?" Caprio asked the inspector. $400, Your Honor." $400. To Alex, that was a dinner. That was a pair of sneakers. That was nothing. But as he watched Maria's shoulders shake, he realized that to her, $400 was a mountain. It was an impossibility. "Maria," Caprio said gently, Do you have the money? No, Your Honor. I have $50. The room was silent again. But this was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of empathy. I see you have your son with you, Caprio said, pointing to a small boy sitting in the back, clutching a toy truck. Bring him up here. The boy, maybe 5 years old, shyly walked up. Caprio smiled at him. What's your name? Leo. Leo, do you love your mom? Yes. Is she a good mom? The best, the boy said. Judge Caprio looked at Maria. Then he looked at the inspector. Then, for a brief second, his eyes flicked to the front row. To Alex. Maria, Caprio said, I'm going to dismiss these tickets. The gasp in the room was audible. Maria's head snapped up. Your Honor? We are going to use the charitable fund to pay for the registration. You use that $50 to buy Leo and yourself a nice dinner. You get that taillight fixed when you can, but you take care of those kids. Dismissed. Maria broke down. She didn't just say, thank you. She blessed him. She thanked God. She walked out of that courtroom like a weight of 10 tons had been lifted off her back. Alex put his phone down. The next case was a veteran, a man who had served his country, who had come home to find the economy had left him behind. He had a speeding ticket. He was rushing to a job interview. I know I was speeding, Judge, the man said, standing tall, respectful. I make no excuses. I was desperate not to be late. I need this work. You served in the Gulf? Caprio asked, looking at the file. Yes, sir. You risked your life for us, Caprio mused. And you're trying to work. You're trying to do the right thing. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Thank you for your service. Case after case. Story after story. A college student trying to pay tuition. An elderly man who got confused by the new signage. People who were struggling. People who were honest. People who owned their mistakes and asked for mercy. And with every case, the figure in the front row changed. Alex's arms uncrossed, his posture slumped. The phone lay forgotten on the bench beside him. He watched the veteran shake the inspector's hand. He watched Maria hugging her son. He watched the humanity that he had been so insulated from. He realized something terrifying. These people were better than him. They had nothing, yet they offered respect. They had valid excuses, yet they took responsibility. He had everything, yet he had offered nothing but disdain. The Diplomat's son title felt heavy now. It didn't feel like armor. It felt like a costume, a silly, childish costume that he had worn to a serious event. 20 minutes had passed. Judge Caprio finished with a young woman who had parked illegally to run medicine to her sick grandmother. He dismissed her case with a smile. Then, the judge shuffled his papers. He took a sip of water. The room went quiet again. The atmosphere shifted back. The lesson was over. It was time for the exam. Inspector, Caprio said, recall the case of Alexander. Alex stood up, but this time he didn't lean. He didn't saunter. He stood up quickly. He nervously smoothed the front of his expensive suit. It felt too tight now. He walked to the podium. His legs felt heavy. He stood there, and for the first time, he looked Frank Caprio in the eye. Really looked at him. He didn't see a bureaucrat. He saw a man who held the scales of justice, not made of gold, but made of heart. Well, Caprio said. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was curious. You've been sitting there for a while. You've seen how this court operates. You told me earlier that you were comfortable, and that your father's title meant you didn't have to follow the rules of this room. Caprio leaned forward. Do you still feel that way? The camera zoomed in on Alex's face. The arrogance was gone, scrubbed clean by the raw reality of the last 20 minutes. His lip trembled slightly. No, Your Honor, Alex said. His voice was quiet. I can't hear you, Caprio said. No, Your Honor, Alex said, louder this time. I don't. You mentioned your father as a diplomat, Caprio continued. A man who represents his nation. Do you think if he were standing here right now, watching you lean against that podium, chewing gum, treating officers with disrespect, do you think he would be proud? The question hit Alex like a physical blow. He looked down at his shoes. Italian leather. Maria's shoes had been canvas, full of holes. No, Alex whispered. He would be ashamed. He would be, Caprio agreed, because a diplomat's job is to build bridges, not burn them, to show respect to the laws of the land they are in. You are a guest in this courtroom, just as you are a guest in this society, and you behaved like a landlord. Alex nodded. Tears were welling up in his eyes. Not tears of fear, like before. Tears of shame. Deep, burning shame. I'm sorry, Alex blurted out. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't the slick apology of a politician. It was the clumsy, raw apology of a boy realizing he had been a jerk. I was wrong. I was arrogant. I shouldn't have said what I said. You refused to stand, Caprio reminded him. I did, Alex admitted. The words tasted like ash, but he forced them out. And I apologize. I was trying to prove something, and I proved the wrong thing. And to Inspector Quinn? Caprio asked, gesturing to the large man in the uniform whom Alex had treated like furniture just moments before. Alex turned. This was the hardest part. Looking at the judge was one thing. He was an authority figure. But looking at the inspector, a man he had deemed beneath him, required a level of humility Alex hadn't accessed in years. He looked at Quinn. Quinn looked back, his face stern but not unkind. He was waiting. Inspector, Alex said, his voice cracking. I was rude. You were doing your job. I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you. It won't happen again. Quinn held his gaze for a second longer, weighing the sincerity of the words. Then, the inspector nodded. A short, sharp nod. Apology accepted, son. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair. The tension in the room finally broke. The air, which had been tight enough to snap, softened. You see, Alex, Caprio said, his voice taking on that familiar philosophical cadence that has made him a viral sensation across the globe. Money is a powerful tool. It can buy you a fast car, it can buy you a nice suit, it can even buy you a good lawyer. But there is one thing that no amount of money and no diplomatic plate can ever buy. The courtroom was silent. Even the children in the back seemed to be listening. Class, Caprio said. Dignity, character, those things you have to build yourself, brick by brick. And today when you walked in here, you knocked your own building down. But just now, with that apology, you started to pick up the bricks. Alex nodded. He wasn't checking his watch anymore. He wasn't thinking about his lunch reservation. He was just listening. Now, Caprio said, looking down at the file, we have the matter of the speeding, and the parking in the fire lane, and the disrespect. Alex swallowed hard. I'll pay the fines, Your Honor. Whatever the maximum is, I'll pay it. It was an offer made not out of arrogance this time, but out of penance. He wanted to fix it. He wanted to write a check and make the bad feelings go away. Judge Caprio smiled. It was a small, knowing smile. I know you can pay it, Caprio said. That's the easy part for you. For Maria, who stood here 10 minutes ago, $50 was a tragedy. For you, $500 is a rounding error. If I fine you, you will learn nothing. You will swipe a card and forget this happened by dinner time. Alex looked confused. Then, what? I'm not going to fine you, Caprio said. The room murmured. Was he letting him off, after all that? And, Caprio continued, raising a finger. I am not going to hold you in contempt. I am not going to lock you up, though I have every right to. Alex let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. But, the judge said, and the word hung in the air. I am going to sentence you to something harder than a fine. Caprio pointed a finger at the young man. I sentence you to remember Maria. Alex blinked. Sir? I want you to remember the woman who stood here and cried over $50, Caprio said intensely. I want you. The next time you feel like you are better than a waiter, or a doorman, or a police officer. I want you to remember that everyone has a story. Everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Your father is a diplomat. He represents a country. You represent humanity. Start doing a better job of it. I will, Alex whispered. I promise. The tickets are dismissed, Caprio said, slamming the file shut. On the condition that you take that $500 you were so ready to pay the court, and you give it to someone who needs it, not a charity, not an organization. You find a person, maybe a Maria, and you help them, and you don't tell anyone you did it. That is your penance. Alex stood there, stunned. He had walked in expecting a fight. He had expected a transaction. He was leaving with a mission. Good luck, young man, Caprio said. Thank you, Your Honor, Alex said. And then he did something he hadn't done when he entered. He bowed. A slight respectful inclination of the head. He turned to leave. He walked toward the heavy wooden doors. But this time, he didn't saunter. He walked with his hands out of his pockets. As he passed the gallery, he didn't look over their heads. He met their eyes. He nodded to the veteran. He nodded to the mother. He pushed the doors open and walked out into the bright Providence sunlight. The camera lingered on the empty space where he had stood. Judge Caprio looked at Inspector Quinn. He'll be all right, Quinn muttered, organizing the next file. He just needed to be reminded, Caprio said, putting his glasses back on. Sometimes the best view of yourself is the one you get when you're forced to look at others. The judge looked into the lens of the camera, breaking the fourth wall for just a moment. Next case. The screen fades to black, but the lesson lingers. We live in a world that is obsessed with status. We post our highlights, we flash our brands, we use our titles like weapons to cut in line. We tell ourselves that because we have more, we are more. But in 20 minutes, inside a small municipal courtroom in Rhode Island, a 22-year-old boy learned that the hierarchy of the world is a lie. He learned that a single mother with $50 in her pocket can have more dignity than a millionaire in a bespoke suit. He learned that authority isn't about power, it's about responsibility. And he learned that the only time you should ever look down on someone is when you are helping them up. Frank Caprio didn't just save Alex from a fine that day. He didn't just save him from a night in a holding cell. He saved him from himself. He saved him from becoming the kind of man who dies rich but is buried alone. There is a diplomat's son out there somewhere today. Maybe he's older now. Maybe he has children of his own. And you have to wonder, when he sees a service worker, or a struggling parent, or a police officer, does he still see a servant? Or does he see Maria? Respect is free to give, but it is expensive to lose. If you believe that character counts for more than currency, and if you believe that justice should always come with a side of mercy, then you are in the right place. We tell these stories not just to entertain, but to remind us of who we can be when we drop the ego and pick up the compassion. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join us. Let's keep learning together. Let's keep standing up for what's right, even when the judge isn't watching.